wouldn't have believed this if it hadn't happened to me. My husband, before we got married, was a neat freak. When I used to visit him as his girlfriend, Daniel had different shoes for different parts of the house. I wasn't allowed to wear my shoes inside the house. He had slippers for the living room, slippers for the bedroom, slippers for the toilet, and only the living room slippers were allowed in the kitchen. They must not be mixed up. He does not have OCD, because he could tolerate a bit of disorganization, especially when we were having fun or enjoying quality time together, as long as everything was cleaned up afterward. Sometimes, it got extreme. He would shout at me for placing my leg on the sofa or the table. But I didn't see this as a big deal, because it's rare to find a man that neat. My husband wears a boxer for only one day, doesn't repeat dirty clothes, and he always smells good. He used to say something that I didn't take seriously at that time. He would say, "I don't want kids in my house. Children are a messy job." I brushed it off because I believed he would change his mind when I got pregnant or after giving birth. I thought the fact he was now a father would change his heart. After all, most men are proud to have a child to carry on their name. We got married and lived happily for 2 years before I conceived. I came home joyfully and informed him about the pregnancy after confirming it at the clinic. But my joy was cut short. He looked at me and asked, "Who are you pregnant for?" I told him, "You, of course. You're my husband. Who else would get me pregnant?" Then he said, "And with whose permission did you get pregnant?" I couldn't believe it. I tried not to let it affect me. I dismissed it as one of those 5 minutes of temporary madness men have. But at around 5 months pregnant, I had gained some weight, and he began to complain. He said I looked round, out of shape, and even had a different smell than before. He started nagging about everything. Sometimes, I'd be too tired to tidy the house right away, and he would complain and then clean it himself. The real problem started after I gave birth. When I went into labor, Daniel was at home but ignored my cries for help. I had to call a neighbor, who drove me to the hospital. She even brought me home the next day. My husband didn't show any care or concern. He never showed love for our son, Ethan. He called him names like Sai, Y, Use S, Bass plus Ord, and more, saying he was the one causing problems between us. The only time he ever held him was when the baby was crying while he was trying to nap and I was in the bathroom. He picked the baby up and placed him outside the house, in front of the living room. That was the moment I knew something was truly wrong. That day, he sent me and our child out of our matrimonial room to another room. I thought one day he might send me out of the house, so I reported him to his mother and his friends. I couldn't bring myself to tell my own parents because I didn't want to tarnish his image. I respect my husband and wouldn't want my family having issues with him. His mother spoke to him countless times. His friends also tried. I discussed with him. Everyone who could has talked to him. But he remains adamant. He says he wants only me, not the child. He says he never wanted children and never will. He doesn't have a personal issue with me. In fact, after childbirth and with all the stress, I lost weight and returned to my previous shape. But the problem starts whenever the baby cries, poops, or even makes a sound. For the first time in my life, I've seen someone who hates the smell of a baby, something most people cherish. He constantly complains that the house smells like the baby. He nags about everything I do involving the baby. Sometimes, he directs his anger at me. It's been 4 months now. Raising this child feels like raising triplets because I'm doing everything alone. He doesn't help. He doesn't give me money anymore because he knows I'll spend it on baby formula or diapers. I tried doing exclusive breastfeeding, but I was too stressed. So, I added formula to support breast milk. Even then, he still refused to give me money for it. I've had to call friends to help me buy formula and diapers, even though they know my husband is financially capable. I finally opened up to one of my friends because I couldn't keep dying in silence. I'm begging him to allow me to get a job so I can take care of the baby, but he hasn't accepted. I don't know what to do anymore. My husband has no problem with me, only with the child. He even suggested I drop the baby at an orphanage. Everyone has tried to talk to him and has now given up. I know my husband is not insane, but I can't explain what's wrong with him. I don't want to raise my child in a toxic environment. I want my son to experience the love of a father. Is this how I'm going to continue my life? Will I end up a married single mother? Will my husband ever change? Will things ever get better? I ask myself all these questions and more, but I have no answers. I'm confused. I'm exhausted. And I'm tired. Has anyone ever been in my shoes? What is the solution to this? How can I convince my husband to love his own child, his own blood? I just don't know anymore. After that conversation with his mother, I thought maybe, just maybe, Daniel would soften his heart. I thought love would somehow seep through the cracks of his stubbornness, but I was wrong. Things got worse. He began avoiding the house altogether. Some nights he wouldn't come home until very late. Other times, he would sleep in the guest room without a word. I started asking myself questions I never thought I'd ask in my marriage. Is he seeing someone else? Or is the idea of being a father so unbearable that he's trying to escape me too? One Saturday evening, Ethan had been running a fever. I was exhausted, sweaty, and my eyes were red from crying. I had no money left and had been boiling herbs and rubbing him with wet cloths to reduce his temperature. When Daniel came home, I rushed to him, relief flooding my chest. Please, Daniel, Ethan is very sick. We need to take him to the hospital now. Please. He didn't even look at me. He just walked straight to the bedroom, washed his hands, and changed into clean clothes. Then, he said the words that froze my blood. If you think I'm going to spend my money on that child, you're dreaming. That's your responsibility, not mine. I stood there trembling, holding a burning child in my arms. The man I married, the man I respected, had just made it clear he had no place in my son's life. That night, I begged a neighbor to drive me to the hospital again. I sold the gold necklace my mother gave me as a wedding gift just to pay the bills. When we got back, I found my clothes scattered in the hallway. Daniel was in the living room, eating calmly. You can stay here, but the boy sleeps in a separate room from me. I don't want to hear him cry in the middle of the night again. It was in that moment I knew. I was not just married to a neat freak. I was married to a man who saw my son, his son, as a mistake. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. I became a shadow in my own home. I stopped wearing makeup. I stopped laughing. My friends started avoiding me because all I could talk about was how tired I was. But the breaking point came one rainy afternoon. I was bathing Ethan when Daniel stormed in, his face twisted with disgust. The smell of baby soap and powder makes me sick, he snapped. I told you to keep all that in the other room. I looked at him, dripping water from my hands, my baby in my arms, and I asked, Daniel, do you even love me anymore? He stared at me for a long, cold moment before saying, I told you from the start what I wanted. You chose not to listen. I wanted you. Not this. He pointed at our child like he was pointing at dirt. That night, as the rain tapped against the window, I held Ethan close and cried silently. I knew deep down that if I didn't act soon, my son would grow up thinking he was unwanted, and that thought broke me into pieces. But I also knew one thing. I couldn't keep living like this. And for the first time, I began to think about leaving. What I didn't know, however, was that the very next thing Daniel would do would force my decision faster than I ever imagined. 2 weeks after that rainy night, things between us had grown cold. Not the kind of cold that comes after an argument, but the kind of cold that feels permanent. We barely spoke. When we did, it was either about chores or complaints about Ethan. One afternoon, I had stepped out to quickly buy bread from a shop nearby. I left Ethan in his cot, sleeping peacefully. It was a 5-minute walk. By the time I returned, the house was too quiet. I rushed to the bedroom. The cot was empty. My heart jumped into my throat. Daniel! I screamed, running into the living room. He was sitting there calmly, watching TV, with a cup of tea in his hand. Where's Ethan? I demanded, panic already shaking my voice. He didn't look at me. He's fine. Where is he? I screamed again, my knees going weak. Daniel finally glanced at me and said, "I dropped him off somewhere better. Somewhere that actually wants him." My heart stopped. "What do you mean? Where did you take my baby?" He shrugged casually. "An orphanage. I told you, I don't want a child in my house. Now you can have peace, and so can I." At that moment, I felt my world collapse. My vision blurred, and I didn't even realize I had thrown myself at the door, barefoot, running into the street in the pouring rain. I didn't care who was watching. I didn't care about my dignity. My only thought was, find Ethan. I ran from one nearby orphanage to another, screaming his name, my voice hoarse from crying. People tried to hold me, but I broke free every time. Finally, after hours, I found him, in a small, poorly lit room at the third orphanage I entered. He was lying on a worn-out mattress, wrapped in a blanket that wasn't even his. His eyes lit up when he saw me, and he reached out his tiny hands, giggling like nothing had happened. I held him so tightly I could barely breathe. I cried into his hair, rocking him, my tears soaking his blanket. In that moment, I knew I could forgive many things, but I could never forgive a man who would throw away his own child like trash. I walked back home hours later, soaked to the bone, my baby sleeping on my chest. Daniel was still on the couch, watching a football match, as if nothing had happened. I didn't speak to him. I didn't even take off my wet clothes. I went into the room, packed a small bag for myself and Ethan, and walked out of that house without looking back. I didn't care where I would sleep that night. I didn't care how hard it would be. But I knew one thing for certain. I would rather struggle alone than raise my son in a home where he is unloved. And as I stepped into the cold night with my baby in my arms, I whispered to him, "Ethan, you are wanted. You are loved. And I will fight for you until my last breath." I don't know if Daniel will ever change. I don't know if he will ever realize what he threw away. But I know this: my son will grow up knowing his worth. And that, to me, is worth more than any marriage. That night, I ended up at my friend Clara's small apartment. She didn't even ask too many questions. She just held me as I broke down, my sobs shaking the walls. I told her everything, from the pregnancy to the orphanage incident. She was shocked, but she didn't judge me for staying so long. She only said one thing: "You've already taken the first step, Mary. Don't go back." But the reality of my decision hit me the next morning. I had no money, no job, and no plan. Daniel had always controlled the finances. All I had were a few clothes, a handful of baby supplies, and the little gold chain I had kept hidden from him. The following week, I started looking for work. I would strap Ethan to my back, walk under the hot sun, and knock on shop doors. Most people took one look at the baby and shook their heads. "Sorry, we need someone without distractions." There were nights I thought about going back to Daniel, not because I missed him, but because the weight of survival was pressing hard on me. But then I would remember his face when he said "somewhere that actually wants him," and my resolve would harden again. 2 months passed. I finally got a small job at a laundry shop. The pay was little, but I could at least afford formula, diapers, and a room in a shared apartment. It was cramped, but it was mine. And then, Daniel found me. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was hanging baby clothes outside when a sleek car pulled up. Daniel stepped out, wearing the same confident smirk he had the first day we met. He walked up to me slowly, ignoring the stares from my neighbors. "Mary, enough is enough," he said. "Come back home. I miss you." I laughed, not the kind of laugh that comes from joy, but the kind that comes from disbelief. "You miss me, but not our son." He glanced at the door where Ethan's tiny voice was babbling from inside. "Mary, you know how I feel. I still don't want the child, but I want you. We can arrange something. He can stay with someone else, and we can be happy again." My hands started shaking. "Daniel, that child is not something to arrange. He is a part of me. If you can't love him, then you can't have me." His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you can survive without me? You think the world will be kind to a single mother? You'll come crawling back. I know you will. I looked him straight in the eye. Watch me. He left without another word, but I knew that wasn't the end. Daniel wasn't the type to let go quietly. And deep down, I feared he would try again, not for love, but for control. What I didn't know was that his next move wouldn't just be about me. It would put both me and Ethan in danger. 2 weeks passed after Daniel's visit. I had begun to feel a small sense of peace again. Work at the laundry shop kept me busy, and watching Ethan grow stronger every day gave me strength I didn't even know I had. But peace, as I learned, can be an illusion. It was a Friday evening. The sun had just set, and I was cooking noodles in my tiny shared kitchen while Ethan played on the mat. I didn't notice the shadow outside the window until the door creaked open. I turned, and froze. Daniel was standing there. He hadn't knocked. He hadn't called. He just walked in, his eyes scanning the room like he owned it. "Mary, pack your things. We're going home." I shook my head, my voice trembling but firm. "This is my home now. Leave." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to that cold, dangerous tone I remembered too well. "I told you, I don't want him here. But I want you. And if you won't leave with me, I'll make sure he's gone." Before I could process what he meant, he took a step toward Ethan. My heart leapt into my throat. "Daniel, don't touch my son." I screamed, rushing between them. The neighbors must have heard the shouting because I saw the door to the corridor open slightly. But Daniel didn't care. He grabbed my wrist, squeezing so hard I thought my bones would snap. "You think you can survive without me? Let's see how far you get when you have nothing." With my free hand, I shoved him with all the strength I had. He stumbled back, hitting the edge of the doorframe. His face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this, Mary." He stormed out, but my legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. That night, I didn't sleep. I locked every door, every window, and kept Ethan beside me on the bed. The next morning, when I stepped out to buy baby formula, my heart dropped. A small white envelope was stuck under the door. I opened it, and inside was a photo of Ethan taken from outside the window while he was sleeping. No words, no threats, just the photo. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just anger anymore. This was a warning. And I knew, the next time Daniel came, he wouldn't just be asking me to come back. I stood frozen with that photo in my hand, the edges trembling between my fingers. My first thought was to call the police, but then I remembered, Daniel had friends in the force. If he found out I reported him, it could make things worse. I didn't have time to think. I had to act. That night, I called Clara. My voice was barely a whisper. "I think Daniel is watching us. I need to leave. Tonight." She didn't hesitate. "Pack only what you can carry. I'll send my cousin's friend. He drives interstate buses. He can take you somewhere Daniel won't think to look." I hung up and began packing while Ethan slept. Every sound felt too loud. Every shadow outside the window made my heart race. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps in the corridor, and I nearly dropped the bag. By midnight, a small knock came at the door, 3 short taps, just like Clara had said. I opened it to see a stocky man with kind eyes. "We have to move fast," he said. I strapped Ethan to my chest, grabbed the bag, and stepped out into the cold night. We moved quietly, my heart pounding with every step toward the street. But just as we reached the corner, I heard a car door slam. I turned, and my blood ran cold. It was Daniel's car. He stepped out slowly, his face lit by the dim streetlight. "Mary, where are you going at this hour?" His voice was calm, too calm. The driver whispered urgently, "Get in the bus, now." Daniel's eyes narrowed as I moved toward the bus. In 2 long strides, he was in front of me, blocking the path. He reached for Ethan, and something in me snapped. "If you touch my child, Daniel, I swear you'll regret it for the rest of your life." My voice was so loud it startled even me. A few neighbors peeked from their windows. Maybe it was the witnesses, maybe it was the fire in my voice, but Daniel froze. His jaw clenched, his hand still halfway out. Then, without another word, he stepped back and watched as I climbed into the bus. The driver wasted no time. Within seconds, we were pulling away. I turned to look out the window. Daniel was still there, standing in the street, his eyes following us until we disappeared into the night. That ride felt like the longest journey of my life. Every bump on the road felt like a step toward freedom. And yet, I couldn't shake the fear that Daniel wouldn't give up so easily. When dawn broke, I was in a small town miles away from the city. Clara's cousin met me at the station and took me to a small, quiet house at the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was safe. I sat on the bed, holding Ethan as he slept peacefully against me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over. Daniel wasn't the type to disappear quietly. And if he ever found us, I might have to fight again. Only this time, I would be ready.